The artwork of the 4 weeks residency in Wongol, a small village, is presented in one of the little 2 cabins in Neuendorf Nature Art Park. In Wongol, the hills covered with trees, bushes, and a large variety of herbs inspired my artwork. In the beginning, I looked at some leaves. Their structure reminded me of the image of a brain. So I covered my head with them and tried to think like a vegetal. Later, I was reflecting about the protective role of grass, which covers the ground with a wide variety of spaces, some very long, dancing in the wind, others short, tiny, but strong. Each herb blade, even cut and dried, is useful for the soil, keeping moisture and serving as a shelter for a multitude of living organisms. I decided to use some long blades of grass to wave a little carpet to protect my feet from the cold ground. I built a very archaic waving tool, just a few nails hammered in the ground and some red thread. Looking at this little piece of waving, I found it could be used for a lot of other protections, and I built a place in the shadow, the roof of a house, a purse or bag, a rough blanket for something very small. I called this part of the work handicraft. Weaving is a pleasant occupation, I thought, and I found a small herb in a beautiful light green color. I started to wave it, again with red thread. While doing this activity, I remembered myself as a child, weaving colored paper strips, and my delightful feeling of doing this. To do something which seems beautiful to me and had no other use than this, I kept on doing useless objects. I looked at leaves, admiring the shape, the texture, the color. And I tried to keep their color by pressing them in between books. I also tried to saw them. And I made the observation that leaves need light to show their beauty. I called this part light. While thinking about protection and observing nature, it occurred to me that protection is not far from invasion. I decided to explore this direction. And I wrote a little story for the leaflet of the exhibition. Here is the story. I imagined my working table with 3 beautiful leaves on it. I looked at them closely and I admired them. Suddenly, leaves were falling from above on my head, my shoulders. Little by little they covered the table and the ground around it. I was afraid. Would they cover me completely? I decided to hide under the table. From this position, I could see climbers crawling over the floor, from the door towards the table, climbing up the table legs and hanging from the tabletop, until I couldn't see anything else but shades of green. And there, in this uncomfortable position, I felt safe. All this green around me. I was breathing green, breathing deeply. Maybe protection and invasion are the same thing, I thought. It's the point of view which makes a difference. I call this part fear and creation. The pressed and dried leaves changed or lost their color, but were still beautiful. I arranged them on rice paper. This work was called conservation. Leaves and stones stitched on rice paper and hanged on braided thread was for me a symbol of spirituality. The need to observe, to search, to name is the beginning of science. The 4 panels on rice paper are called age, youth, understanding, law. At the end of the residency, I found it necessary to make another object, and I wove a grass shoe. This work is called Back to Nature. Enriched by past experiences and going through the endless game of evolution, we return to the beginning.